Welcome everyone to Berkeley Lab's Live Science Series. My name is Elisa Battaglia, Content Instruction Coordinator for K-12 STEM education and outreach programs here at Berkeley Lab. I am very excited to have you all join us today. We are starting the new year with our Live Science Series, diving deep into how scientists study climate change, exploring the Amazon through field studies, climate modeling with supercomputers, and learning from Indigenous communities how to improve landscape health with the use of fire. In case you have not joined us for a previous live science session, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, or Berkeley Lab for short, is one of the 17 Department of Energy national labs located in Berkeley, California. Berkeley Lab is home to 14 Nobel Prizes and credited with the discovery of 16 elements on the periodic table. And we also like to say we have the best view from the lab, as you can see from our picture here. Okay, so now I would like to introduce our special guest host for today's program. Alishba was an intern here at Berkeley Lab last summer and taking part in our high school internship program, Experiences in Research. Alishba is currently a high school senior here in the Bay Area and is also a youth staff at the Ecology Center, which we will learn more about later on in the program. So hi, Alishba, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And to get started, I was wondering if you can tell us what's your favorite experience been working with Berkeley Lab?
Yeah, hi Alyssa. So my favorite experience working with Berkeley Labs this past year, I really enjoyed the mentor who I had, Sarah Smith from the energy technologies area. I learned a lot from her and it felt more like a collaborative space, I feel, and it was really engaging considering that it was online.
Thank you so much for sharing. That sounds awesome. It sounds like you had a great mentorship from Sarah Smith. So that's awesome to hear. Okay, so I think we are ready to get started. So Alishba, can you remind the audience with a couple of reminders?
Yeah, so first, what we've done is we have turned on the live transcription. So, and at the screen that allows you to view the closed captioning during the session. And second, if you haven't started it already, we have an accompanying that you can find on our website. That link is being posted now. We also encourage you to use the chat box, not only to click on links, but also to ask questions and be interactive. We will be checking for your questions and comments throughout the session. We hope that you can stay with us for the whole session, but in case you have to go, the session is being recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording on the website next week, along with live science cover numerous topics, science, star formation, and particle physics. So let's get ready to use the chat box now. And our first question of the day to the audience is, where can you find carbon? Please let us know in the chat box where you think you can find carbon. It's okay if you're not 100% sure. All right, so the air, if somebody's saying everywhere. Let's see if we could get a couple more in the chat. Soda. Okay, so there's some different guesses here. All living things. Interesting. Interesting. All right. So thank you all for your answers in the chat. And let's see how we did. So I'm actually now going to ask Dr. Bill Riley to join us on screen. He is a senior scientist at Berkeley Lab's Climate and Ecosystem Sciences Division, and he works on modeling terrestrial ecosystems and their interactions with climate and climate change. Hi, Bill. Thank you for joining us. How do you think the audience did with this question?
They did great, and they're right. We'll see some of these answers come up when I discuss my work in a minute here. I like the one with soda, but that's not what we're going to focus on.
All right, yeah, great job everyone with those answers. So Bill, the question here is, why do we care about carbon so much? And can you let us know what it has to do with climate change and why it's so important?
Sure. We have a slide here with a brief graphic which kind of makes one of the points, and that is that humans, through their burning of fossil fuels and through land use, things like fire, which we'll discuss also, emit a lot of carbon as CO2 to the atmosphere. And the ballpark number is 10 petagrams of CO2 to the atmosphere each year as carbon. And then what happens once that CO2 is in the atmosphere, it interacts with the radiation coming from the sun and from the radiation coming from the planet that's re-radiated and causes warming over long time scales, decadal time scales. And so we have a quick question here to give you a sense of the scale. In the chat, or you have a poll coming up. How big is that number, a petagram? Is it 10 million, 10 billion, 10 million million, or 10 million billion grams? So just take a second and answer that. And Elishba, can we see the answers yet? I don't see them. Let's see. So the correct answer is D, 10 million billion grams. So it's a lot. Interestingly, it's not as large as what terrestrial ecosystems take out of the atmosphere every year and return to the atmosphere, which we'll describe here on the next slide. And here's this schematic is to give you a sense of how big these other fluxes are. So you can see the 12 number I've put here in red. That's the one I mentioned was 10 petagrams. It's actually larger than 10 now. It's even larger than 12. But this is the 12, let's say, petagrams of carbon every year returned to the atmosphere or added to the atmosphere from human activity. The number coming into the terrestrial biosphere from photosynthesis is 10 times that large, 120 petagrams of carbon per year. And the amount released is ballpark the same, 60 petagrams from plant respiration and 60 petagrams of carbon from microbial respiration of organic matter in soils. And then there's also this fire flux, which we've sort of bulked in here with the red number of 12. And I want to speak just a little bit to each of these fluxes on the next slide. We'll start with photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is the process whereby plants use light, energy, and CO2 from the atmosphere and nutrients from the soil to take CO2 out of the atmosphere and grow. So we have a little video here describing this process in an entertaining way. Let's let that.
Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions. Plants take water, sun, and CO2 to make glucose, the sugar that they use for food. They also put oxygen into the air so we can share, because oxygen is everywhere. The energy transforms from solar to chemical all the time, everywhere. The process is identical in every plant and every tree, enabling all living things to be. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reactions and synergy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this discussion of sunlight and transfer of energy. Photosynthesis. Let's get into this process of chemical reaction.
All right, thanks. So the basic idea here is that the energy from the sun and CO2 from the atmosphere is transformed into plant biomass, first into sugars and then into starches, and then used throughout the plant to build stems and leaves, etc. And that's a very large removal mechanism of CO2 from the atmosphere every year. Going to the next slide, we have a little more discussion of the other side of this. So remember I mentioned the amount of carbon coming out of the atmosphere to photosynthesis. Before humans were manipulating the atmosphere with CO2, the system was largely in balance over longer time periods. So there was the carbon was coming into the ecosystem, and then it was being returned to the atmosphere via respiration. So living organisms using the carbon from plants, leaves fall and die, or plants die also. That carbon is respired by microbes in the soil, as well as the plants respiring some of that carbon back to the atmosphere. And with respect to how we represent these processes and models, I just want to briefly mention that this is really a complicated set of problems. In addition to the complexities of photosynthesis, soils are really complex. This is a figure showing you, and the scale is down here in the lower right, showing you a microscope version or picture of microbes in soil. That 1 micron, that's a millionth of a meter, and to put that in context, human hair is ballpark 25 millionth of a meter. So these are very small organisms, and they live in a really complex structure in soils. And their job is to decompose the organic matter. That's how they survive. So what I was going to show you here is just to give you a sense of that complexity. This is a reconstruction of a single soil particle created by taking X-rays, slices through the particle, and then putting them all together so that you could actually visualize what it would be like to travel into the middle of a soil particle, which is where the microorganisms live that are degrading the organic matter and returning some of it back to the atmosphere. And so you can imagine the microorganisms and the carbon exist in these complex structures that the numerical models that represent the carbon cycle need to, one way or another, represent. So I've this is a very brief description of the global carbon cycle here. The other thing I wanted to mention, because we'll hear from Kent a little bit later about fire and its effects locally in California, but fire also has a big effect on the global carbon cycle. And so in these numerical models of climate, we have to have some representation of fire. And fire, of course, immediately, what happens when you have a big fire, you release a lot of carbon to the atmosphere. There's also a longer term effect, which is that the vegetation recovery and the soils recovery can take a long time. And as you know, fires are both human caused and caused by natural ignition like lightning. In California, there's a lot of human caused fires, and in more remote systems, there's a lot of lightning caused fires. So we have a quick tour of the globe here. This is a reconstruction of fire from satellites. This is a NASA reconstruction of fires around the globe. And so we have a little presentation here. We'll go through it. You can get a sense of where fires occur on the planet.
Some parts of the world burn every year. Australia is one of those places. The fires in Central Australia are grassland fires that burn in largely unpopulated areas. The areas in the north are comprised of eucalyptus woodland and savanna fires. Agricultural fires dominate Asia and Southeast Asia. Crop cultivation fires in China, Thailand, and the Punjab region of India can be seen here. Catastrophic forest fires in Russia, where it takes a long time for the vegetation to recover, can also be seen. Africa really is the fire continent. As healthy green vegetation dries, these areas are consumed by sweeping waves of fire that move from north to south and south to north each season. The fires in Africa are primarily grassland fires, but there are also management fires associated with agriculture and maintenance. In South America, you see pastoral maintenance fires in the Amazon basin and fires that are used to clear the tropical rainforest for agriculture and grazing. In the United States, you can see fires in the southeast associated with forestry and agriculture. The recent fires in Texas and wildfires in the west are also seen.
So that was just a very quick tour to give you a sense. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, sort of to introduce some of the discussion later, are the fires in California. This is another reconstruction from satellite visualization of the Camp Fire, which happened in 2018. And I really am just showing this to give you a sense that, as you know by now, fires are occurring in California, and sometimes they can occur really quickly if the fuels are dry and there's a lot of wind. So what this is showing is snapshots every 5 minutes of that fire spreading. This is in the foothills of the Sierra 2 hour east and a little bit north. And this fire caused, of course, a lot of damage in the town of Paradise, if you remember, and disrupted people's lives and actually air quality throughout the state. So we can go to the pictures here. I just had some pictures showing you how devastating this can be, and the fires went really quickly through town so that people were, being evacuated without much warning. So the last thing to say here is that we take information from all these sources and we build computer models of the terrestrial biosphere. And this is just a figure showing how this looks in the models for photosynthesis. GPP is gross primary production. That's what's being shown here. The photosynthetic withdrawal of CO2 from the atmosphere. And then these types of processes are integrated in the global Earth system model so that we can make predictions of what happens in the future with respect to climate, because as I mentioned, CO2 affects the radiation balance of the planet. So our next part of the talk is going to be led by Robinson Nariguan Juarez. And Robinson is going to talk a little bit about the type of measurements we need to build these models. So I haven't really spent much time discussing that, but all the models are largely based on what's known from other scientists who go out into the field to develop theory and observations for us to develop these models. So Robinson's going to talk about some of his work in the Amazon and his interactions with people there. So Robinson, I'll pass it on to you.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. My name is Robinson Negron Juarez. I'm a research scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley lab. As Bill mentioned, we need to measurements in order to inform models. And specifically for this presentation, I'm going to focus on windrows, which windrows are produced by strong winds. When they hit the surface, they can knock down trees. The person here in blue, or now is I guess a little dot. As you can see, many trees were knocked down by winds. Also, you can see most of the trees have the same direction because these winds has a preferential direction in the Amazon. And these images were collected using a drone. So how field studies add to models? The figure on the left is the Amazon. And in the Amazon, I track disturbances. So when there is no disturbance, you see everything is green because it's forest. But when there are disturbances, you're gonna see something different. Knock down trees. So in order for me to quantify these disturbances, I need to go to the Amazon and do a lot of field work. So what do you think I need to bring to the Amazon in order to do field work for many days? Could you put your answers in the chat just to read some answers?
All right, so in the chat, we have somebody saying drone, food, water, and a microscope. Yeah, I was also thinking water. Okay, food, measurement tools. Let's see. Camera,
Yes.
computer, bug spray,
Bug
tent.
spray. Yeah, bug spray. Yeah, that is very important. Yes, all the answers are correct. So when I go to the Amazon, I use a boat because it's basically rivers everywhere. And sometimes the boats are too big for small creeks. As you can see the figure on the left, you just need to swim. Sometimes you find the fauna is very interesting. And when you are able to go to that place where these disturbances happen, you can set up your plot, as we can see in the next slide. Oops, oh yeah. So I set up the plots, and these plots are have some criteria. I track them using satellites, and I check where is supposed to be a high disturbance and low disturbance, and I try to sample as much as I can, covering the whole range of disturbance. And of course, you need a machete because you need to cut some branches. The figure on the top left is me with some indigenous people from in Australia. So we're indigenous people in Australia, and myself, an indigenous person from Peru. And I see that the plots we mark all those plots are those red tags you can see in the trees. That is the beginning of my plot and the end of my plot, and I count all trees alive and the trees. If it's possible, we can also identify the trees. So when I have all those information, I can build a little model to quantify the disturbance. That is showing the figure on the left. On the x-axis is a delta MPV, delta is a little triangle. MPV stands for non-photosynthetic vegetation, because here I'm monitoring, measuring dead trees. Non-photosynthetic vegetation is just a technical name for dead trees, because the trees, they don't do photosynthesis. On the y-axis, you can see mortality. So for all those plots that I sampled the number of dead trees across the whole range of disturbance, I can then make a little model and say for this level of disturbance measured by the satellite, I can say with some confidence how many trees, dead trees are in that area. And of course, it's going to change from ecosystem to ecosystem. In blue is a tropical forest, and in green here is referring to temperate forest, the work I did in the Gulf Coast here in the United States. So I can include this model in a big model in order to quantify, for instance, number of dead trees, the carbon loss. Bill Riley mentioned, talk a lot about the carbon. So how much carbon the trees produce, etc. This work, I just don't go by myself. I go with indigenous people. They help me first to go to the place I need to go. Most of the towns are close to the river, because the river is the main way that people move from one place to another. The towns are really interesting. They have basically all things that you can imagine, but in a smaller scale, of course. For instance, the figure on the left is showing the little green cabana is the library. So when I go to the field, I go to areas where there is no people. So I need to set up my little hotel with my crew, and I stay there for several weeks doing my measurements. So interesting going with the native people is because things in the Amazon are not like you think they look like. For instance, this figure on the left is showing two things. One, some things on the trunk, and other something different. So I would like you to tell me in the chat what you think you are seeing here. So the bugs are eating the leaves. Parasites. Yeah, yes. So this is very tricky. The first one I think is obvious. You can see in the next slide. Yes, there are parasites. They are very tiny, actually. The second one, well, I think, did somebody say something? Yeah, they look like leaves, but there were not leaves. And that is something interesting in the Amazon. The native people, they immediately recognize these little details. Next slide. And they also warn you about things that looks very cute, like this famous red-backed poison frog is very famous. It's very tiny, as you can see the size of your nail, and looks very cute, but it's really poisonous. So you don't touch them basically. And then other animals, as the figure on the right, that looks very scary. Also, don't touch them better. Next slide. But even with all these danger, when you are with the native people, you can see how beautiful the Amazon forest is. And something important is always listen to native people, because they are living there their whole lives, and they know how to preserve the forest. They know how to conserve the forest in different ways that we can imagine. And this is my last slide.
Thank you so much, Robinson, for sharing your experience with us on your field study. That's very valuable information.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was really cool to hear. And I feel like I just went into Amazon with you, Robinson. So we started our life science series at a global scale, looking at the carbon cycle with Bill. And then we just finished our journey conducting field studies through the Amazon with Robinson. But now let's return locally and take a look at communities here around the Bay Area and how they are addressing climate change. Elishba, so when I introduced you at the beginning of the session, I mentioned that you are a youth staff at the Ecology Center.
Yeah, I am. So I'm on the youth staff at the Ecology Center, and I've been working for 3 years now. So the first 2 years I was a youth intern, and just last year I got promoted to youth program assistant. And what I do at the Ecology Center, since there are so many departments, I work with those different departments. So for example, we have a farmers market team, and they run the Berkeley farmers markets. So I help out at the Berkeley farmers markets. And through working at the farmers markets, I've been able to see the importance of the local food movement, supporting local farmers, and just had some great conversations with community members. How when we keep our food local and we keep our money local as well, we promote a circular economy, and we also help combat climate change, because when we eat food that is brought from very far away, that a lot of carbon emissions. And so that's farmers market. And I also work at the eco store. And at the eco store, we sell sustainable household products, and that includes things like cleaning supplies. We even sell clothes as well. So from there, I've learned the importance of sourcing materials locally, organically, and sustainably, and also making sure that the people who manufacture the products are being paid well, so the products are fair trade. And once again, whenever materials get shipped very far away, they do produce carbon emissions. So I have learned the importance of keeping things local and how that can help preserve our environment. And
that is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And so now what we're about to see is a video that's going to showcase the Ecology Center's Youth Development Program. And as we watch the video, I encourage our audience to take a second, stand up, turn around, stretch, go get a drink of water, do what you need to, and enjoy the video.
The Ecology Center has always been a very dynamic organization. It responds both to sort of the immediate things within the community and then also more broadly and globally. But we believe that we really need to focus on the leadership for the future in environmental and social justice movements. And so over the last few years, we've really been focusing the organization on creating youth development opportunities. So our youth development program is really designed to empower local young people to become community leaders.
I think it's important for my generation, people my age, to learn about environmental issues is because we're the ones that are going to determine our future and the future of our communities, and then outside of the future of our planet. And then we're also going to impact generations to come behind us. The Ecology Center, it's a melting pot of different generations. And I think it's important to have sort of those different levels of generations because we're allowed to fill in each other's gaps.
All right, well, welcome back everyone. This was a great video. I learned a lot about the Ecology Center, and thank you so much, Elishba, for sharing your experiences that you had working at the Ecology Center and all the things that you've learned about the environment and how like the carbon impact for the climate change. So I think we are going to jump into now continuing with our learning of the climate change, but now we're going to focus a bit on fires, right?
So we are, and I think many of us have seen images and videos of destructive wildfires, so it's really important that we learn more about them. And we can learn more about how to combat these destructive wildfires from our Indigenous communities. And here to share more with us on this topic is Kent Lightfoot, a professor in the anthropology department at UC Berkeley. Kent works with a collaborative team of scholars from local tribes, universities, and resource agencies, exploring how lessons from the past can contribute to the development of new protocols to protect our environment rooted in the deep history of tribal practices. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kent.
Well, thanks, Elishba. It's a really a great pleasure to be here today. And what I'd like to do is to build on some of the points that Bill and Robinson have made in their very excellent presentations today. Bill introduced the relationship of the carbon cycle and wildfires. And one of the things to keep in mind is that with global warming, we expect an increasing number of high severity catastrophic fires, such as what Bill talked about with the terrible Camp Fire. And Robinson, he talked about the importance of working with Indigenous people. What I'm going to do is look at both of these issues and discuss how we work with tribes here in California to mitigate the risk of catastrophic fires. And we're going to be a little closer to home here in the Bay Area. And we have various approaches that we employ today for reducing the dangers of wildfires. And one approach is to fight fire with fire and to implement programs of prescribed burning. And what prescribed burning is it's where we carefully set smaller, low intensity fires to reduce fuel loads and to restore healthy forests. And this is after years of fire suppression. We're trying to now tend the forest. And in this video, courtesy of Scott Stevens, it's from the Blodgett UC Reserve up in the Sierras, where they're doing prescribed burning. And you can just see a prescribed fire in action. What I want to do today, though, is really talk about prescribed burning that was done by California tribes. And they refer to this as cultural burning. And there's a long history of cultural burning here in California that was done for various reasons, like clearing areas and controlling insects, improving hunting, but really producing, in many ways, the productivity of plants and animals. And we have a poll about how long do you think people have been burning? Less than 100 years, about hundreds of years, about thousands of years, or more than thousands of years. And just if you can maybe answer that, and we'll take a moment here and let's see how you do in terms of thinking about this important issue. And then whenever the answers come back in, we will take a look at them. Ooh, here we go. Ooh, very well done. So about thousands of years or more than thousands of years. So both actually are right. About 1,000 years, we know here in California that people were burning for maybe, around 10,000 years or so. But also now there's been new work that suggests that some of our early ancestors, like the Neanderthals, may have been doing this. And that's, really many thousands of years ago. So what we want to turn to now is just, how did tribes, burn their tribal territories? And what they did is they had a series of frequent burns. And these would be low intensity surface burns. And these were done to enhance the diversity of plants and animals that would come back after the burn and essentially would open up areas and reduce fuel loads. And in doing this, they really minimize the risk of these major catastrophic fires that we're seeing today. Our work with tribes is taking place here in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. And we do what we call eco-archaeology. And we're trying to understand the ancestral stewardship practices that Native peoples employed here, where they were using fire to enhance their ecosystems. And a key component of this work, as part of eco-archaeology that I'm talking about, is doing excavations of ancestral sites, ancestral village sites, as you see here. This is a 3,000-year-old village site on the Central California coast that we've worked at. And a key thing we do is we take lots of soil. Now, Bill loves soil. He showed you some great images of the soil that he works with. I love soil as well, and I'm sure Robinson loves his soil. And basically what we do is we take that soil that we excavate from these ancestral sites, and we do a method called flotation. And we are able to recover materials in the soil. Now here, I want you to think about this in your chat box. Think about, what do we discover in these soil samples from ancestral tribal sites? What are the kinds of remains we find? And just go ahead in your chat box and just work through that. And I know Elishba, she's going to help me out here in terms of giving some of the answers.
All right, so in the chat, we have somebody saying seeds, ash, rocks. I also think rocks can be found. Microbes.
Yeah, those are all
Yeah.
great, great answers. Yeah, we find a lot of rocks. There's no question about that. We also find those seeds, burned seeds. And if the seeds or organic materials are burned, they preserve very, very well. We also find lots of ash, and yes, there are a lot of microbes, although I turn those over usually to Bill when he's looking at that. One of the things we do, of course, is we take that soil, we float it, and then we analyze it in the lab. And we begin to work out the different materials, typically the different plants that are found there. And what we have found, what we've recovered, are plants from coastal prairies. And I've listed a few of the plants here in this slide. Interestingly, these coastal grasslands or prairies, have become very rare with fire suppression in recent years. There just hasn't been much cultural burning that really enhances them. And what we found is we find evidence in the work that we've done, the eco-archaeology, of frequent cultural burning, where tribal people were burning probably every 3 to 5 years in a series of patches. And this goes back at least 1,200 years based on the work that we have done. What we are doing now is we're employing the findings of this eco-archaeological research to help local tribes and California state parks restore some of these coastal prairies and other productive plant communities, that have become very rare, become quite scarce today. We are working specifically with the Alma Mutsun Tribal Band, And they are one of the Ohlone tribes here in the Bay Area. And we are working to bring back good fires. That is, these cultural burns or prescribed burns to reduce fuel loads and to enhance the ecosystems. This is Val Lopez, who is the tribal chair of the Amah Mutsun. If I can have the our next slide, another shot of Val in some cultural burning that's going on. Now, an important component of this work is growing plants in order to restore these coastal prairies and other ecosystems. And the Amah Mutsun, the tribe, and its land trust have developed a plant propagation program where we grow plants. And these are plants that we've identified from the eco-archaeological work that we know were once very plentiful in these areas. In the greenhouse, which is what you see here, we are growing more than 30,000 seedlings for replanting areas after cultural burns. And this we're doing on California State Park property. We also have a series of field beds. This is where we grow plants, again, identified from the earlier, the eco-archaeological work, ancestral plants that were enhanced by the tribes in this area. And what we're doing is we're growing plants to obtain seeds, and then we can reseed areas after we have cultural burns. And here we've got 90,000 plants that are producing seeds. And they include, for example, tar weeds, California brome grass, red maize, all sorts of different plants. So just to conclude, we're undertaking this eco-archaeological work with tribes to help really revitalize our wildlands today. And we're working to really bring back cultural burning to California. And there's multiple reasons. One is to revitalize the native plant communities that used to be very common, but in some cases have become rare. We also want to reduce fuel loads. We want to help minimize the risk of catastrophic fires, to do something about this real catastrophic situation the state is facing now. And then also provide places for tribes to harvest various kinds of traditional foods and medicines and crafting materials, for example, for making baskets. So there's a lot of different reasons. And basically, that is what I've got to say. And again, great pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your kind attention. Thank you.
Hi, Kip. Before you jump off, we just got a question from an audience that I was wondering you could answer. We have a question that one thing that has changed over the years is the amount of water available. And is that putting this work at risk?
That's a great question. It's interesting that most of the plants that we're working with, these traditional plants, tend to be drought tolerant. They're native California plants. Most native California plants, like here in Central California, like the tarweed and a lot of these plants we're showing you right here, they tend to be able to live very nicely on a low amount of water, because droughts have been part of the cycle of California for thousands of years. So they actually do pretty well. I mean, a lot of them, of course, if you get a little bit of rain, it always helps. But they are pretty drought tolerant. And so they work well in many of these areas to really replant them. Thanks, Elisa. Yeah, great question.
Thank you to our audience for the question. And if there are no other questions, I think, Alicia, you're going to summarize what we've learned. There's been a lot that we learned today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kent, for sharing with us about prescribed burning practices and your work in ecoarchaeology. And we've learned a lot of valuable information today, so I will just summarize it all. So we started off with Bill, who shared about the importance of the carbon cycle and how human activity and wildfires can affect it. Bill and other scientists use computer models to study the carbon cycle, but it turns out that field studies are important to fill gaps in those models. And Robinson brought us on a field study through the Amazon rainforest, where he worked with local indigenous communities to navigate the environment. And finally, Kent shared with us how indigenous communities' practice of using prescribed burning is a way for us to take care of the environment and fight fire with fire. So thank you so much to Bill, Robinson, and Kent for joining us today. And I also want to thank our audience for sticking with us and asking questions and engaging in the chat. We hope you enjoyed our program, and we hope to see you at our next live science session. Have a good day, everyone.